this is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed human.
Body Bags with Joseph Scott Morgan. How many of you have ever walked out to the mailbox and cracked it open and looked inside, and there was that envelope? Most of the time it's a white envelope. It's got a little window on it, a little plastic window. And when you look at the plastic window, it's got your name in there displayed prominently, and then you look up in the top left-hand corner, and this piece of mail has been sent to you from the kind folks down at the clerk of court's office, your local courthouse. And most of the time, the news that it bears to you is to inform you that you have been selected as a winner for the jury pool, and you're going to be heading downtown, and you're going to sit in a big room with a lot of other people listening to cases, perhaps if you get selected, and then making a determination about what shall happen to a person at the end of a trial. But just for a moment, think about this. You're going about your life, minding your own, doing everything you can to obey the law, and suddenly you've been selected for jury duty. It turns out that it's a homicide. And this homicide is going to beat everything you could have ever imagined as far as what one human being would do to another. Today, we're going to talk about the brutal murder of a young woman who was just getting started out in life. A young woman whose life was ended at the hands of a man wielding an ice axe. I'm Joseph Scott Morgan, and this is Body Bags. Dave, I know that you're from California originally, but let's face it, we've adopted you as our own here in the South. You've been here long enough. You're a Southerner. I don't think California. That if I ever came over to your house and said, "Gee, Dave, can you lend me your ice axe?" First off, you might look at me and say, "Have you lost your mind?" And secondly, you might say, "What's an ice axe?" Or maybe we'd have to reverse that. I don't know. Because I got to tell you, the only time I've ever seen an ice axe is generally in a movie. Cliffhanger with Sylvester Stallone, which is a pretty good movie. And here's an old one with Clint Eastwood, The Eiger Sanction, which I love that movie. And it was kind of like his attempt at kind of a James Bond kind of thing. Good movie, a little bit campy, but, Clint Eastwood, forget about it. So, but yeah, I saw ice axes in there too. And certainly in my background, I can officially tell you right here, and I want everyone to know this, I have never worked a homicide involving an ice axe. And for me, I'm thinking, how does this even come into play in a case like this?
I actually looked up what it was. I thought it was something that might be used to make a hole in the ice to go ice fishing, something like that.
Yeah.
This is not something that most of us would have unless we lived in an area where we spend a lot of time, with ice. But, you're in Central California, and where they are in this particular case, I'm thinking, okay, maybe, there's a lot of different areas you can go to where an ice axe, I guess, might be handy. Daniel Gunnarson's stepfather had a huge RV garage, a garage to park his RV. So these are people that are outside. They're outdoorsy people. So having an ice axe, probably not out of the blue for them. But again, I didn't even know what it was. I saw this.
Yeah, I didn't either. And when you see this thing, it's kind of an interesting tool.
Yes.
Because it's got, many of them have kind of a curved handle. They look like they're maybe about a foot and a half in length, the handle itself, but the head is configured in an interesting way. It's not what we would traditionally consider to be an axe, where you've got a single blade axe or a double bladed axe. Think Paul Bunyan. It's not like that. This is actually a device that's got a long tapered end that comes to kind of a sharp point, and then backing up from on the underside of it, this thing has got multiple teeth. It almost looks like a saw where you could saw through something, but that's not the point. When you strike the axe with that leading edge, those teeth actually hook into the underlying ice, and you can kind of pull yourself up with it. You flip this thing around, and the other side has got a how can I describe it? Kind of a bladed edge, but it's flat. It runs parallel to the ground. If you're holding the axe itself, this tool, and this is meant, and interestingly enough, this inside of the axe is actually used to cut steps into either ice or hardly packed snow. And so the whole thing has a utility. And then if there's not enough, on the very end of the handle, there's actually a spike where you can take it and drive it down into the ground so that you're not going to lose it. And of course, it's got a hook for a lanyard, because when you're climbing up an icy surface, you don't want to drop this thing down into, what do they call it, a crevasse? Isn't that what they call it? I think I say crevice,
yeah,
but a crevasse. And so it's always going to be kind of hanging from your wrist. And for whatever reason, Gunderson has decided to use this tool in order to just absolutely obliterate this poor young woman, Kathryn Pham.
This was not a long-term dating relationship between Daniel Gunnarsson and Kathryn Pham. She's 21 years old. She has gone out with him over a month-long period of time. Liked him, but not a serious relationship to her at all. Meanwhile, Daniel Gunnarsson had become enamored, infatuated, over the moon with her. He wanted a deep, devoted relationship with Kathryn Pham. She was not only unwilling, but again, they only dated a couple of weeks. You're talking 4 weeks time. And in that 4 weeks time, she had seen some things that actually would have been red flags, Joe. In particular, just to give you an idea, because Daniel Gunnarsson gets into this thinking it's a long-term big deal for him relationship, and she's not. He picked her up from Las Vegas, bringing her back home, and she was on the phone talking to somebody else. It was Katie and one of her friends that were riding in the car, and Daniel Gunnarsson got so frustrated that she wasn't giving him all of her attention. She was on the phone, and it frustrated him. And then he got mad. And then they're driving. He's weaving in and out of traffic. He's almost wrecking not just them, but other cars. He's driving so crazy because Kathryn Pham is on the phone talking to somebody, that the friend, the girl that rode with them, actually made him stop the car and let her drive. That's how crazy he was acting. He was his mind in a really deep committed relationship with Katie, and she, meanwhile, it was just a guy she went out with. So the night before, at Kathryn Pham's apartment, there's a guy there. There's nothing going on, and Daniel Gunnarsson made a scene. It was a scene that was bad enough that the next morning he went to his stepfather's house and said, "We're breaking up," crying on his stepdad's shoulder and all that. And I'm guessing, based on what took place, the stepdad said, it's not too far gone. Apologize to her. Don't do it over the phone. You got to do it face to face. Man up. Apologize for being an idiot, and see what happens. Well, Daniel Gunnarsson took part of this and did just that. He did go to Katie and apologize enough that she agreed to go with him. They went back to Daniel Gundarsson's stepfather's house. Now, at the house, there's a huge garage for parking the RV and things like that. And there were a number of people doing work on the house. Some upgrades were being done, and there was a whole group of painters. And so when Daniel Gunnarsson gets there, he gets Kathryn Pham out of the car, and they walk into the garage. They're not there very long when the painters, the painting crew, they start hearing a girl's screams and some pushing and dragging around of things. It's enough to get their attention. And one of the guys decides to go and check it out. And when he opens the door to the garage, he sees Kathryn Pham, the 21-year-old girl he had just seen a few minutes earlier, on the ground on a sofa cover, naked, bleeding everywhere. And Daniel Gunnarsson is standing over her body on a stepladder, soaked in blood. I don't know how you react to that, Joe.
I don't either. And that, it's fascinating that you should bring this up, because the reactions of those painters that were in there that, were coming back into this area to actually do more work. I think their intention had been to be in there, to paint in this particular location. But when you're hearing screams emanating from this RV garage, and it's probably going to echo, you can just imagine. And that high, shrill pitch that an individual would make as they're being injured over and over, and those pain centers are just absolutely screaming out, not to mention maybe a lower roar that's coming forward from him as he is attacking her. That would have drawn their attention pretty quickly. But yeah, to walk in, see the perpetrator standing there, just saturated in this woman's blood, this poor young woman, her body sprawled before you, almost like she's been sacrificed in some bizarre way, partially disrobed. I can only imagine, if you're one of those workers, you think, have I just opened a gate to hell? You hear people express themselves when they see these horrible traumatic events as, I've heard people say, and I've said it, you can't take its measure. You can, in this case. You can take its measure based upon the injuries that Kathryn Pham sustained. She actually sustained, Dave, 10 defects to her body. And I was trying to envision this in my mind. If you were to describe an injury that was generated with one of these ice axes, and just imagine, if you will, just for a second, Dave, if you were to take that ice axe and flip it so that you're looking right at the leading edge of the point of that axe, and as it kind of tapers out. What's fascinating about this, just from a clinical standpoint and assessment standpoint, when you begin to assess these injuries at the scene, do you know what these little insults are going to be shaped like? These little defects, triangles, actually.
Really?
That's their appearance. And here's kind of a little aside that I'm kind of fascinated with. You notice that, and not too many armies, I guess armies carry them now as more of a dress uniform. A bayonet is carried by soldiers and whatnot, and it's generally carried in a sheath or a scabbard on the side. You've heard in old movies where they'll say, prepare to assault, fix bayonets, and they'll draw the bayonet and they'll attach it to the end of the rifle. Well, the bayonets that we have in the modern term are an edged weapon. Did you know that they had to outlaw a type of bayonet that we used to use going into World War I, and it was triangular shaped? And one of the reasons that they had to outlaw this device is because it violated the code of war. Because if you stab someone with a sharp instrument that is triangular in shape, those injuries are almost impossible to stem the flow of blood from because of their configuration. Whereas if you have a bladed edge, a single bladed edge, it's going to be, there's a higher likelihood that that person might survive under those circumstances. And they actually outlawed that triangular shape that you see. It's a gruesome looking item, but when you look at this ice axe, that's exactly the way it looks to me. And I was thinking about this. Katie was actually attacked where she was struck on not just the face, but about the head, about the neck, and the chest. So he is striking her multiple times. First off, that means a couple of things when you think about the dynamics of an attack like this. He's got her in a location which I don't know that she's ever been in this location before. Remember, they're new in this relationship. This is his stepfather's home. It's an RV garage. She is literally at his mercy, and I can only imagine that if there is an outer door, it's going to be pulled shut behind her. And here she is, trapped inside of this location with a monster, and he has a lot of anger. He's got her positioned in this environment so that when he attacks her, everything is in the upper body, the chest, the neck, and the head. So the chances that she's going to be able to fend this guy off or deflect any of these injuries is going to be almost nil. He's going to kill her once he sets out with this weapon, because that's you're not using this just to intimidate her. I guess that at some point in time he could have, but he set out to take her in there. He knew specifically that that weapon was in there. And by the way, I looked it up. The length of the handle of this thing is actually 2 feet in length. Now, what does that mean? Well, if you'll take your hand, if you're listening to my voice, and you extend your hand out with, and imagine that you've got, say, for instance, like a baseball bat in your hand, and you extend it, you've just increased, if you're going to strike somebody, you've just increased your ability to transfer energy, not from your hand, but to the end of that bat, the barrel of that bat that you're swinging down on somebody with. With this ice axe, you're literally taking this weapon, this tool, and every bit of energy as you raise this thing above your head and drive it downward is transferring from your shoulder, down your arm, through your wrist, your hand, that 2 foot long handle, all the way up the shaft of that handle and into the head of that axe. And in that 1 millisecond, every bit of that energy transfers from that little tip, that little point, as it's driven down through Katie's body. Making sense of the senseless. Unfortunately, families of victims many times look to us in my field to ask us to make sense of things. And listen, we can't. I'm telling you that. We can explain the mechanics of things. We can talk about the science of it. We can talk about a measurement of death, or a length of time it might take for someone to die, to bleed out. We can talk about how long they've been dead. We can discuss all of that, but to make sense of it, you can't. There's not sufficient vocabulary in order to make that happen.
At a certain point in time, you look at human beings and wonder, how did this one come so unglued to do this?
Yeah.
And in this particular case, we're looking at a man who is immature emotionally, because the girl is not as into him as he is into her. He was able to talk his way back there by apologizing and getting her to hop in the car and go back to his stepfather's house. So she saw something in this guy that was there. He's able to put up a facade or something, because he didn't look crazy or act crazy or desperate or angry when he picked her up. But it wasn't really a short window here. It wasn't 5 minutes, 10 minutes. It wasn't 20 minutes. According to the police report I pulled up from the Kern County District Attorney's Office, it was an hour from the time the painters outside heard screaming and then heard shuffling going around inside that big garage. They waited an hour, and that's when they went in. We know that when the painter opened the door, he sees Kathryn Pham naked, bloody, face down on the floor. The report says that Gunderson touched her remains in a sexual manner. I've heard of every other thing from, assault to necrophilia, but I've never heard anybody refer to it as touched her remains in a sexual manner, because there was, as far as we know, no eyewitness to this. So how do you get to say that term, touched her remains in a sexual manner? I don't understand that.
That tactile ability that we possess as humans, that thing that we need in order to make it through life, where we touch and kind of feel our way through our world. It starts when we're, just little ones. And the fact that they're using touch, I've heard them actually use the word, I think that it was one of her relatives that actually used the word toy, which has a very disturbing connotation to me. It plays into this case in particular because there's one more thing I didn't mention to you, Dave, that I think bears repeating. The police discovered not only did he have access to this ice axe, he also donned gloves that were there. It sounds like they were work gloves, perhaps. They're very non-specific about this. And one of two things kind of come up in mind. Do you remember just a few seconds ago when we were chatting and I talked about the area of her injuries on her body? We talked about the head, we talked about the neck, and we talked about the chest. Okay. Right. Well, if that's the case, I wonder if when they began to examine her body, because he is supposedly, and they use this term in one of the descriptions, his body is smeared in blood. His own body is smeared in blood. So that means smearing of blood is not like contact transfer, like when you hear us talk about if somebody comes in contact with a pool of blood, or they're fighting somebody, and you contact and transfer blood. That no, that's not what they're saying. They're saying his body, Dave, his person was smeared with blood. I wonder if he took those gloves off, and there's evidence that they discovered not only at the scene, but probably at autopsy as well, where they could see bloody handprints adjacent to her genitalia, perhaps, where he is now transferring blood, her own blood, that's coming from the upper body, and he's going into these private areas of her body, because when she was found, Dave, she was found, what they call prone position. And for those that don't know what a prone position is, that's face down. If you flip a body over, that's supine. I prefer to use the term supine and prone, because you can be in a prone position and not be face down. In my line of work, I've seen heads turned all the way around on bodies, broken necks, so it's non-specific. But when you begin to think about what he did with the body afterwards, that plays into how the police began to handle this case. And it also plays in, I think, to how someone that was attempting to mount a defense of this person, they would use the postmortem activity probably to attempt to demonstrate that Gunderson was not in his right mind when he was perpetrating these actions against Katie, both in the antemortem state and the postmortem state. Because let's face it, when how I talked early on when we were chatting, I talked about those people that received those notices in the mail. It's probably the last thing they were expecting, Dave. And they're sitting there, and they're certainly not prepared to not only hear about someone killed with an ice axe in Central California, but now they're having to deal with necrophilia. And isn't it interesting it seems to me many times with cases like this, the more obscene something is, the more egregious, the more unbelievable it is, many times that can actually work in the favor of the accused.
Well, it was her father, by the way. It was Thomas Pham that said, what kind of an animal would find it entertaining to butcher a girl with an ice axe and then toy with her body?
Yeah.
Can I go back to something, Joe, on the ice
absolutely.
axe? According to police reports, Daniel Gunnarsson hit her with the ice axe at least 10 times.
Yes.
I say at least because they were spread around neck, head, face. Are we talking swinging it like an axe, a traditional axe, swinging it like that? What kind of injuries are going to occur compared to like the skull to the neck, to the face? I would think they'd be a little different hitting me in the back of the head.
They would. And a lot of the stuff, you're not going to appreciate it. That's why autopsies are so important. Okay. This is a perfect example of this, Dave, because when you remember how I said that the insult or the defect to the body might very well appear to be a triangle, when you're assessing this. The skin, the tension of the skin will allow for this to present, particularly when you clean off the blood, which is something that we do at autopsy. We clean up all the blood off the body. It's foolish not to, right? I mean, that just makes sense. So that we can understand externally. But when you, let's say, for instance, you have a strike to the head with this ice pick, that triangular shaped element of the blade as it enters that external table of the skull, you'll have like a little defect or a hole in the external table of the skull, but you're also going to have extensive fracturing. Whereas if you go to, say, for instance, the neck, and I'm not talking about like the vertebral bodies in the neck, not to say that there's not something there, but the non-bony prominences, it's going to drive through the soft tissue into the trachea, up into the larynx, perhaps through the vessels, and you'll see almost like a bullet track that runs through there, but it's only impacting soft tissue. So each one of these assessments is going to be different, and here's kind of the way it'll play out in the morgue. And we've talked about this extensively before, but it bears repeating in Katie's case. As you examine these insults, Dave, what you're trying to determine is, since we've got somebody that is toying with the body in death, how many of these injuries came after she was dead? And the way that we figure that out is to try to determine if there is or is not hemorrhage present in the wound tracks. And we can't necessarily sequence them where we go 1, 2, 3. It happened like this and like this and like this. You can't do that. But what you can do is separate those things that happened either in the antemortem during life state or the postmortem after death state.
I'm looking at this, Joe, how he was able to convince her to go into the garage with him. But then I'm thinking of the painters. You see a young man and a young woman walk into a big RV garage, and you hear the girl screaming. Somebody being attacked with such an item as an ice axe is not going to have a light, giggly scream. This is going to be a scream in terror, knowing she's going to scream for her life. This is a sick crime from beginning to end.
Yes,
the damage done to this woman's head and face. He was out to destroy that thing that he fell in love with, because he hadn't been with her long enough to know her. He doesn't know her. He only knows her physicality, her face, and he's trying to wreck that one thing that has rejected him in his mind. It boggles my mind that here we are, and that his attorney, I'm not kidding, Joe, when I tell you this, his attorney actually suggested in court that he didn't do it, that somebody else could have snuck into the garage. He takes her in there, somebody else comes in, does the damage, and he's just there in a state of shock and the real criminal got away.
Yeah, the fact that he is absolutely saturated with her blood that, again, has been smeared on his person as if he's participating in some kind of ritual with the body, and her body there laid out before him. I think that, why is he not running into this? If he's not the perpetrator, why is he not running into the streets, screaming murder at the top of his lungs, asking the police to show up? And to that point, all of that is absent in this case. And I can tell you this, during the course of this trial, there were women on the jury that were subjected to hearing all of this. There were 9 women, 3 men. And there was weeping throughout the courtroom. There was weeping because for that moment, that instant in time, they understood in her last moments what Katie had gone through, at some level, certainly not the full force of it, but they understood. And as it turned out, Daniel Gunnarsson was in fact found guilty of Katie's murder, and he was sentenced to 24 years to life imprisonment. If you or anyone that you know is currently in an abusive relationship, is in fear of their life, please have them call 1-800-799-SAFE. That's 1-800-799-7233. I'm Joseph Scott Morgan, and this is Body Bag.
This is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed Human.